come to the table so we can get started, please. Okay, great. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order, please. David, are there any public speakers?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have two public speakers today. The first speaker is Jason Pinero, followed by Rachel Faust. Let's move on to Rachel Faust.
Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Foss, the Senior Research Analyst for reInvent Albany. We advocate for more transparent and accountable state government, including for state authorities like the MTA. I'm here today to, 1, ask you to move the MTA's fiscal year to better align with the state budget calendar. We thank Board Member Veronica Vanterpool for advancing this common sense solution. 2, ask you to adopt additional measures to improve the MTA's budget process, including opening up data for all MTA budget materials, such as the PDF documents presented today, by releasing them in CSV spreadsheet form. And 3, to note our opposition to the current proposal from the governor's 30-day amendments to create a 6-person expert panel to determine congestion tolls and approve and review MTA operating and capital budgets. The amendment does not say who will appoint this panel, and during the budget is not the time to make major changes to redistribute power over the MTA's governance structure. Governance changes should be discussed after the budget when they be thoroughly and fully discussed by MTA stakeholders and the public. Regarding your current fiscal year, your vote on fare and toll increases this week is a shot in the dark at a problem that you can't fully see. The solution here is easy. Turn on the lights and give yourself more information about what your budget will be by moving your fiscal year start date to after the state budget is adopted. Your current budget ignorance is significant. Whether or not the MTA will have an additional $15 billion from congestion pricing for its 2020 to 2024 capital plan has huge implications for how much the MTA can spend on future operating and capital programs. The resolution before you would move the budget to a July 1st start date, beginning in July 2020, with the MTA adopting a one-time 6-month budget to adjust to this new time frame. We ask that you consider the following issues in evaluating this proposal. 1, should this change be made further in the future when potential cost related to this one-time shift can be mitigated? There is plenty of time to consider how to best make this change, which we support. 2, has the MTA examined what cost savings could be produced by the exchange? 3, if not this proposal, what other solutions do MTA staff have to make a more sensible budget process? Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Our second and final speaker is Jason Pinero.
Good afternoon, Larry, Bob, Neil, and everybody in the Finance Committee. First, I want to apologize to Neil regarding the comments that I did last month. I know that went a little bit harsh on you, and I'm here to bring some ideas to the table, and I hope that Larry and Bob will listen to them. First of all, consolidating all human resources in the agencies. You guys know that right now, every agency has their human resource office. We should consolidate them into one. Second of all, consolidating regional rail operations into one. That means the Metro North will be renamed as MTA Regional Rail North Division. This includes the service of west of Hudson. And the Long Island Railroad will be renamed MTA Regional Rail Eastern Division, just like SEPTA has in Philadelphia. And third, instead of the congestion pricing that Governor Andrew Mark Cuomo is offering, my suggestion is offer congestion pricing for those entering the city from Westchester and Long Island, but instead of having it in a flat rate, having it dynamic. How much traffic it is, that will be the amount that the driver will have to pay to enter the city from points north and points east. So I hope that you guys consider these ideas And if you guys need any more ideas and suggestions, I'm here more than welcome to provide feedback for that. So I'll see you guys on Wednesday.
Thank you very much. I understand there's one additional speaker.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I feel like I've been dashing to this all day. My name is Lisa Dagley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA, or PCAC. There's been a lot of conversation this morning about some rejoicing, in fact, that fare hikes would be, that the base fare would be kept flat. And that's, that is good news, but I think that what's been lost in a lot of the message is that we're still looking at a fare increase for the weekly, monthly, and the commuter railroad users. So I just wanted to, my point here today is really that while it's good news that the base fare is being kept flat, that there should be no mistake, that there will still be a fare hike going forward. The most critical takeaway, I think, of all is that what's really needed is sustainable and reliable funding. And we will be testifying and we will be going out and beating the drums in support of that, including congestion pricing. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Dagley. And Mr. Chairman, that's the end of the public speaking session.
Thank you, David. Next, we have the approval of the January 22nd minutes. May I have a motion, please? Second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Minutes approved. David, can you take us through the work plan?
There are no changes to the work plan, and the next item is Budget Watch. This month's Budget Watch focuses on January preliminary operating results and subsidy cash forecasts through February, and these results are measured against the adopted budget. Starting with operating results, passenger revenues were on target for January. Subway and bus were unfavorable by a combined $3 million, primarily reflecting lower than expected weekend ridership, while the Long Island Railroad was favorable by $1 million and Metro-North was on target. Toll revenue was favorable by $4 million, reflecting higher than expected traffic volume, the result of favorable weather conditions, and the completion of Sandy-related tunnel restoration work. Preliminary expenses for January was $64 million favorable. Lower OPEB current payment expense, the result of having negotiated lower prescription medication pricing in addition to greater rebates, and savings from vacancies and underspending in non-labor categories were the primary drivers of the favorable expense variance. Overtime was $9 million unfavorable, driven principally by station and track work supporting the Subway Action Plan.
You can sit there.
Debt service for January were favorable by $11 million due to timing related to issuance of new debt and the timing of debt service deposits. Moving to subsidies, total subsidies in February were $49 million favorable. The payroll mobility tax was $3 million unfavorable, while petroleum business tax was close to target, and the real estate transaction taxes were $53 million favorable. Last month, the real estate transaction taxes were $41 million favorable. Year-to-date through February, subsidies were $92 million favorable. The PMT was $3 million unfavorable, while the petroleum business tax was on target, and real estate transaction taxes were $94 million favorable. Overall, preliminary year-to-date results are favorable due to receipts from the real estate transaction taxes and favorable expense results due to the OPEB current payment costs, vacancy savings, and other non-labor spending. And that concludes Budget Watch. Next, we have Finance Watch, and Pat McCoy is here. That can be found in Section 4 on page 20.
Okay. Good afternoon. We have just two transactions, which you already had emails on these with the rating reports, but I'll just quickly summarize. On January 31st, we bid out a $454 million bond issue, which paid off an existing ban, and that was put out for a competitive bid. We broke the bond into three different biddable tranches, and the winning bids were provided by Bank of America Merrill Lynch on two of the tranches and JP Morgan for the third one. Later in the day, we bid $750 million of bond anticipation notes. We allowed bidding in increments as small as $50 million to allow wide participation, and we successfully had 10 bidders winning notes, and that's covered there in Finance Watch. I won't go through all the names, but you'll see them there. The all-in true interest cost on the note deal was 2.069%. And just going back to the bond deal, the all-in true interest cost on that was 4.164%. We have two transactions coming up. We're going to bid out another $750 million of notes, and we're currently looking at doing that here in the next 3 weeks. We also have a $50 million transportation revenue FRN, floating rate note, that needs to be rebid, and we're going to put that out for competitive bid as well. Lastly, on January 29th, we bid out a 2.8 million gallon ULSD fuel hedge, and that was won by Cargill Incorporated at an all-in price of $1.93 per gallon. Happy to take any questions on Finance Watch if there are any. Thank you.
We next move on to MTHQ and all agency items. There are 3 action items. The first item is requesting approval for the retention of the law firm Sive, Paget, and Reisel PC effective as of November 5th, 2019, and the addition of this firm to the panel of board-approved outside counsel.
Lee, can you tell us about this firm?
Thanks. In conjunction with our review of congestion pricing and the proposed legislation, we realized we may need some expertise in environmental aspects of the Federal Highway Act. That is not something that anyone at the agency has experience with, and it's also something that none of our outside law firms appear to have, that are on our panel here, to have a specialty with respect thereto. The firm, Sive Paget, is a boutique environmental firm with specific expertise in the FHWA, and we need their guidance and input in congestion with the surface aspects of congestion pricing, because something that I learned recently is that many New York City streets receive federal funding, and therefore they're governed by the FHWA.
They're the premier firm in the field, no ifs, ands, and buts.
And I second that.
Thank you.
I third it.
So the only thing I would add is a question not to be answered now, but where does that leave us in our representation of minority-owned firms?
To use a legal phrase, I'll take that under advisement.
And I presume we'll be receiving that advice at the next meeting.
You shall.
Thank you. Then, may I have a motion on this?
So move.
Second. Any other discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? This item carries. Next item.
The second item is the mortgage recording tax escalation payments to Dutchess, Orange, and Rockland counties. It is recommended that the board authorize escalator payments totaling $4,395,989.19 to Dutchess, Orange, and Rockland counties from available funds on deposit in the MRT2 corporate transportation account.
Any questions or comments on this action item? I have a motion to approve. Second. All in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? This item is approved.
The third item is the 2018 TBTA operating surplus, which seeks approval of resolutions which will certify and transfer $701,956,071 of its operating surplus to the MTA and New York City Transit, transfer $2,602,772, representing 2018 investment income to the MTA, and advances the 2019 TBTA surplus.
Are there any questions on this? I presume there are none. Motion? Second. All in favor? I presume there are no votes in opposition. No abstentions, I presume, either. It's unanimous. Thank you very much.
There are 2 reports and information items for HQ, starting in Section 5, pages 48 to 52. The first is a discussion of a resolution to change the fiscal year. A copy of the resolution, along with tables that compare the MTA fiscal year with the state and city fiscal years, can be found starting on page 48.
Okay, this is the discussion part, right? Do you want to kick it off, Ms. Vanterpool?
Thank you. I'm glad that we are discussing this resolution, which was put forth a few months ago for consideration of the board. So, as I and many others have mentioned, I think we have an irrational budget process and an irrational budget cycle. The fact that we as a board are voting on new revenue from fare and toll increases for a calendar year budget before even voting on the fare hike itself, I think is one example of how it's an irrational budget cycle. And I think aligning our fiscal year, which actually is within the mandate of the board, there are very few things that we as a board can control with regard to our authority. One of them is this, which falls within our bylaws, different from some other measures that require state authorization or state change in state statute. So my proposal for consideration was to better align our agency fiscal year with the state and the city budget cycles, given that those are our two biggest funding partners. And in order to be able to rationalize our budget process, in order to better understand how much money we as an agency are receiving from our fiscal sponsors, or our fiscal partners rather, not sponsors, partners, again, the state and the city. And with New York State's budget cycle theoretically concluding, as it has for the past several consecutive years, March 31st, and the city's also concluding several months after that, July 1st was a proposed start date to shift our agency calendar. Now, we've had some internal discussions. The resolution that I have put forth was not to make that change in this year. It was proposed to make it in 2020 to allow for conversation, to allow for staff to weigh in with data and such. And they have, to some level, I have asked for some additional information that I think we can discuss during this meeting, but I appreciate the opportunity for this discussion in finance.
Is there anyone else? Does finance staff wish? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Mr. Weisbrod.
I support Ms. Vanderpool's proposed resolution. I know that there are issues in implementing this. It's always complicated to change fiscal years under any set of circumstances, and I recognize also that particularly given our schedules, proposed schedules regarding fare increases over time, that has to be smoothed out. But the benefits of doing this, to me, seem to so outweigh the one-time costs and challenges associated with it, that to me there will be benefits for really not only years but decades to come. We are ultimately a creature of both state and city, particularly those two funding sources, and depend greatly on the legislature. It is very difficult for us, as we've seen this past cycle, to put together a budget when we don't know what the legislature is going to do, what the state budget's going to contain, what the city's budget's going to contain, and therefore I strongly support what Ms. Vanderpool has proposed, and ask that management come up with a detailed and very specific proposal about how this can be implemented.
I agree with everything Commissioner Weisbrod just said. As you know, for many years, I have indicated my concern about the schedule of fare and toll increases before our stakeholders act either in Albany or in New York City. I fully understand some of the ramifications of it, but I firmly believe that in the long run it will benefit this authority in that regard, and even more importantly, benefit our constituents, which is even more important than benefiting the authority in that regard, because they'll have a better understanding of what happens with our budget, what happens with our stakeholders, and what happens when and if we need to continue to provide fare and toll increases, which we would all hope could be avoided. So in that context, I would support a much fuller understanding of how this has to work and a much more detailed analysis than we have received so far as to how to implement it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to move to table this resolution until such time as we get the full understanding of exactly what the implications are, how we would implement it, and the like. Not defeating it, just tabling it for the moment.
So I appreciate all the comments that have been made by my fellow commissioners. And what I wanted to add is that I am fine tabling this resolution, but would like to make a very specific request and follow up with Commissioner Weisbrod and others. What I would like to see very explicitly is a scenario that is a cost-neutral scenario. For what time period would this have either no or minimal cost impact to the agency? As has been put forth by some of the speakers and others, and I have actually asked this question of Bob and his team, what are the anticipated savings of moving this? For example, are there savings from not having staff have to reforecast the budget so many times? Are there savings from not having to issue revenue anticipation notes, which was actually a comment raised also by reInvent Albany during the public speaking? What other savings might exist that I, as not being an expert in finance, are just not seeing? I certainly don't want to put forth a resolution that has significant costs to the MTA as an agency, but I'm asking the staff to prepare scenarios that show us what year might this be cost neutral. And so we have a fuller understanding and then can make a decision on moving the resolution forth at that time.
I would just like to add to what Commissioner Vanderpool said. I think we all recognize there is inevitably going to be a one-time cost that's unavoidable, that just associated with any change in a fiscal year. But I'd like to distinguish that one-time cost, which in the overall scheme of things would be de minimis, from the larger issue that I think Commissioner Vanderpool is driving at, which is how we can avoid the loss of essentially a budget cycle and a fare increase cycle. That would be a significant cost. The other costs are, it seems to me, quite manageable, and the benefits would be far exceed the costs. So just want to clarify one-time costs, which are de minimis, from a substantial cost, which I think we all want to avoid. And I think that management, I'm confident, can come up with an approach that would avoid those costs. And just to the point of tabling this, I just would put a time deadline on it, and I would suggest that this has been suggested now since, I think, December. And so management has had a good amount of time to think about this, and so I would ask that a report be made to the Finance Committee at the March meeting.
Let me just technically address the motion to table. Since this wasn't an action item, there's really nothing to table. This was for discussion only. But in the spirit of trying to advance the conversation, the request to Bob Foran's group in finance to come up with a number of different scenarios is reasonable. So let's do that. We don't need a a motion to table. Wasn't an action item. Let's have a report. I mean, look, I'm not, having some familiarity with finance's workload over the past 2 months, it's not unreasonable since he's been catching fast bowls on a wide variety of issues. And I think they've been doing a good job. But let's have that as soon as we can, and then bring it back to the Finance Committee to continue this conversation. Without objection, let's move on to the next item.
Well, I would ask that some parameter of time be put on this, because I think you have, generally speaking, for everyone who's spoken, a consensus that this is something that we ought to seriously consider, and so I would just ask that we do put a time limit on it, so it's not, you know, some vague date in the future.
What seems reasonable, Bob?
Well, I would like to get through, you know, certain, we could give you a report by March. We can do that. I mean, I think we have much of the information that, you know, we would want to prepare and share with you, but I think by March we can do, you know, something for you to consider.
Good. Then let's do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Then we're ready for our next item.
The next information item is the February Financial Plan 2019 to 2022. It's available in both the exhibition book and MTA info, and I'll just go through this briefly. The purpose of the February plan is to incorporate board-approved MTA adjustments that were captured below the line and approved by the board in December into the baseline forecast. The February plan also provides the MTA and its agencies the opportunity to make technical adjustments to their budgets and forecasts, which will result in improved reporting. It also establishes the 12-month allocation of the adopted budget, which will be compared with actual results each month. Specific agency technical adjustments are included in the February plan book, and detailed explanations of the programs and assumptions supporting the plan can be found in the November 2018 financial plan, which is available both in Director's Desk and on the MTA website. Unlike the July and November plans, the February plan does not include any new proposals or programs. However, this plan does reflect some changes that have occurred since December. You all have been provided with the plan. I will now go over the highlights. 2 policy actions that were previously below the line and were approved in December have been incorporated into the 2019 MTA baseline forecast. These include the 2018 general reserve of $160 million, which is released to help balance the budget, and $40 million of fuel hedge collateral, which is the amount in excess of required collateral amounts, was freed up to also assist in balancing the budget. Additionally, some minor reestimates of prior year budget reduction savings, which were below the line, have also been incorporated into the baseline forecast. In addition to some minor baseline timing and other reestimates, baseline changes that were not included in the November plan include a favorable adjustment for the 2019 premiums for the New York State Health Insurance Program, known as NYSHIP, which covers about 40% of MTA employees and retirees. We received notification of the 2019 premiums after the November plan was completed. The lower premiums are estimated to reduce expenses by $57 million in 2019 and about $6 million annually thereafter. Lower than forecasted renewal costs for the excess liability, environmental liability, stations liability, and force account liability policies, which result in savings of $8 million through 2020 and $9 million thereafter. Lower collection for higher vehicle fees, which is delayed following the filing of a lawsuit and the temporary restraining order. I'll go back to the beginning of this. Lower collection for higher vehicle fees, which was delayed following the lawsuit and temporary restraining order and was lifted at the end of January. The delay has an unfavorable impact of $23 million in 2019. Additionally, the outer borough transportation account, which is not programmed into the financial plan, is unfavorably impacted by another $12 million. Lastly, there are several items remaining below the line, including the 2019 and 2021 fare and toll increases, MTA efficiencies, service guideline adjustments, and additional savings actions. These items are unchanged from the November plan. However, a below-the-line adjustment for the delay in the implementation of the proposed 2019 fare and toll increases, reflecting an unfavorable $27 million impact for 2019, has been added to the plan. To summarize, the plan remains balanced through 2019. Favorable impacts from the health and welfare premium adjustments offset the anticipated one-month delay in the implementation of the fare and toll increases and the one-month delay in the collection for higher vehicle fees. Overall, net changes to the bottom line are minor. The plan projects year-end cash balances of $79 million in 2018 and $11 million in 2019, with projected cash deficits of $467 million in 2020, $814 million in 2021, and $976 million in 2022. And that concludes the report on the February plan.
Any questions on the report? Thank you very much.
Next, we have David Ross with procurements for headquarters in the agencies.
So for headquarters, there are two non-competitive procurement actions totaling $3,681,925. The first is a $975,000 contract with National Industries for the Blind. They're a preferred source vendor, and it's for the purchase of and delivery of various safety vests for Long Island Railroad. The second is a $2.7 million extension of a contract with Choice Distribution for the continued supply of hardware and fasteners for multi-agency use. The extension will allow time for finalization of a replacement contract under the all-agency procurement for maintenance, repair, and operations supplies. It also provides time for transition. We expect to come to the board with a new award on that well ahead of the end of this extension.
More questions or comments? May I have a motion to approve? And a second. Are there any questions or comments? Mr. Weisbrod?
Are we only approving this first item?
Yes.
Okay.
So next on the agenda, we have...
Well, hold it. Let me take the vote.
There were the two items. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh,
On these two
it was
items.
the preferred source. Oh, it was the two items, the preferred source and the choice extension. Both.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't suffering from a...
The one,
All
two
in
items.
favor? Yeah.
Two items.
Yes.
First two items, okay.
Okay. Let's do this again. Motion and a second. We've got that out of the way. Discussion on this. That's out of the way, too. Approve.
Aye.
Oppose. Abstain. These two items have passed. You may continue, Mr. Ross.
Thank you, Chairman. So next on the agenda, we have Metro North Long Island Railroad. Metro North has one action for $9,826,216 to award a 22-month design-build contract to Powell Electrical Systems Incorporated for DC traction power switchgear systems at 9 substations on the Hudson and New Haven lines.
And before discussion on the motion, may I have a motion and a second? Okay, then discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain. This item is approved as well.
Great. So there are no items for Long Island Railroad. New York City Transit has two procurement actions totaling $55,470,410. The first is a $46 million non-competitive award to Fuji Electric Corporation of America for reconditioning proprietary door operator assemblies on 660 R160 subway cars. The second action ratifies 6 change orders totaling $9.4 million with Skanska Northeast for additional Enhanced Station Initiative Package 2 work. The design-build contract provides for improvements at various stations on the Astoria line in Queens.
Can we stipulate that all the observations that were made in transit still apply?
Yes.
Okay, then may I have a motion to approve and a second? Take a vote. All in favor? Opposed?
I'm opposed to the ratification of the Skanska items.
And so is Ms. Vanterpool. Abstentions? The item's passed. Thank you.
Bridges and Tunnels is proposing 2 actions totaling $406,975. The first is an authorizing resolution to declare competitive bidding inappropriate for a public works project to replace the upper-level approach decks at the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. An RFP process is proposed instead. The second action ratifies $406,975 change order with VIV Contracting Corporation for additional concrete and interior work that's required to maintain the state of good repair and to enhance public safety at the Battery parking garage.
Motion to approve. Second. Is there any discussion on this action? Hearing none, all in favor? Opposed? Abstaining? The action item passes.
There are no items for FemTech. This concludes procurements. Back to David Keller.
The MTA consolidated financial and operational reports are on pages 70 through 123. Next is David Florio with the real estate report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are 3 action items. One is a walk-in that Mr. Lieber will address at the end. All 3 involve the Long Island Railroad. The first is a lease agreement with Inatomi, New York for a restaurant in Lynbrook, New York. The second is a license agreement with Maple Drake Austell for employee and customer parking on adjacent railroad property in Long Island City. And the third involves the Long Island Railroad concourse at Penn Station.
Before discussion, may I have a motion to approve? Second. Is there any discussion on any of these action items?
Mr. Lieber is going to make a presentation on the Penn Concourse.
I believe that, with the exception of you, I believe that every other member of the committee was present for my presentation. I might like to spare them the presentation,
Okay.
But I'm happy to describe the action if you wish.
No, let me then just respond to, as I've expressed to Mr. Lieber, I'm fine with the substance of the item. I am, however, concerned about the write-up that was presented to us. While it says under funding that the Long Island Railroad, that we have in the MTA's budget $170 million in our capital program for this, there is almost $500 million that is proposed to be funded by the state of New York. However, the MOU for, as described in the write-up, says that all costs will be paid for by the MTA. And I think that is inappropriate. I understand that we may be a pass-through for this, but unless we have a written commitment from the highest levels of the state that, in fact, the additional $500 million or so is committed by the state, I do not think we should be entering into an MOU that says all costs are to be paid by the MTA when we are capping our costs at $170 million.
Okay, and so we're going through a little bit of a kabuki here because Mr. Weisbrod and I have had this conversation, so I'll just repeat what I said, which was that routinely when we enter into any capital, any significant capital project, we don't put in the contract with the contractor or the developer that the MTA's commitment is contingent on third-party funding. So routinely we do not do that. However, we do have the process where we do not enter into those contracts until whatever funding that is going to support those projects has been made rock solid. So that is part of our routine process, number one. Number two, in light of Mr. Weisbrod's concern, I have taken steps to try to obtain a writing from the state that would support the commitment that they have made to fund the portion of this project in excess of the $170 million that's in the current capital program. So I'm hopeful that I'll be able to respond to your concern this week before the board action needs to be taken.
Let me just say that if, in fact, Jano can obtain that commitment in writing, then I'm fine with this. If he can't obtain the commitment in writing at a time when the commitment from the state of New York is presumably going to be somewhat dependent on the state's budget, and we are entering into this MOU, which doesn't cap our commitment at $170 million, then I have grave concerns about entering into it, and I would oppose it.
And may I just add that the MOU, for what it's worth, like all MOUs, has an explicit provision that says it is non-binding. So we continue to, the anticipation is that we would have final documents which would come back, and you would be made aware of them in a couple of months. But as I said, I'm going to try to satisfy Mr. Weisbrod's concern this week.
Merdler.
The second item was a parking lot in Astoria, is it? Or is it Long Island City?
Long Island City.
And who would use that parking lot?
The adjacent property owner. The adjacent property owner runs a business. It would be for customer and employee parking.
Is that in any way impacted by the abandonment, forced abandonment by Amazon of Long Island City?
No, sir.
No.
No, sir.
All right.
Jano, this one is for you. Should all of the paperwork come through to everybody's satisfaction, when would you anticipate this project beginning? Construction.
The entrance portion of this project, frankly, we're going to try to proceed with very quickly because of the opportunity to utilize some of the logistics and staging that's connected to the Moynihan project, frankly. So that piece we're hoping to get done in the time frame of the Moynihan project a couple of years from now. The Carter project will take a little longer. As I said this morning, we want to make sure that the whole thing is done in a way that, you know, preserves the circulation for the passenger environment.
Thank you.
Mr. Weisbrod, I want to thank you for raising that topic, because I sometimes feel like when it comes to capital projects, I'm like someone watching the Food Network at home. I get really, really hungry for all those delicious things, but I can't actually eat them because they're inside the television. We are in a situation where, and this feels a lot like an unfunded mandate, we want to do something great. Many people want to do something great. The governor has been leading on these kind of initiatives, particularly related to Long Island, for several years, and yet I don't know how we afford some things like this, and we haven't even begun. This is not even within the capital plan we already have. This is tied, I assume, to our next capital plan, 2020 to 2024.
No, the funding that we're talking about from the state would enable us to proceed based strictly on the $170 million of MTA funding that we have in the current capital plan.
Plus some additional funding that would come
from the state of New York and not from the MTA capital plan.
Then I feel very strongly and in agreement with Mr. Weisbrod that some sentence or two in this document is necessary to state that it's contingent upon that funding.
All right. Well, that, again, I'd like to debate this offline, but putting, okay, for the first time, to put into a contract that you have with a third party that you're going to make that your commitments contingent on funding from some other source would be a big departure for us. But I have said,
but on risk mitigation, if let's just say the state did not come up with that funding, and we do not have that sentence, the other party would reasonably believe that we could meet those commitments. Is that correct?
I'm in danger of being circular, but I'll come back to the point I made earlier, which is we do not, as a matter of MTA business, and I'm looking at Mr. Foran, who administers this system, which is we do not execute contracts unless we have locked down the available funding. So to the position that we're in right now, we would enter into an MOU. It would have the language that Mr. Weisbrod has focused upon, but we would not be able to actually enter into the contracts that truly effectuate this and are binding until we had the requisite commitments. That would be our normal practice.
You mean construction contract?
Yes. In this case, it's a development contract as well as a construction contract.
I mean, I think part of the issue here is that usually when we enter into these contracts, we're not doing it with private parties. Not always, but usually. And here, this is a very large contract, MOU leading to a contract. With a private party, we generally don't, or with most of these, we don't enter into an MOU first. We just enter into a contract. So the money is all there. Here, we are entering into an MOU which while to an extent, as you say, non-binding, is nevertheless a part of this process. And we've had this conversation offline. I don't want to bog it down here, but since we can't enter into a contract anyway and start anything until all the money is approved, I don't quite understand why we have to approve the MOU until the money is all in place. And so I would, again, ask that if we get that commitment from the state, that's fine. And if we don't get that commitment from the state, that we hold it off. I mean, I don't know where the state money is coming from. Is it coming from this year's budget, which is still pending in Albany? Is it coming from some future budget? Is it coming from some past budget? I don't even think we know that. So, and maybe you do, Jano, but until we do, I think prudence would dictate that we hold off.
Mr. Lieber, since this is a non-binding MOU, did you have some proposed solution for this particular
I am going to
conundrum?
pursue the writing that Mr. Weisbrod has asked for, but I just would underscore that this is no more contingent. You know, again, this is a somewhat important point because big projects often depend on third-party federal funding in particular. And when we enter into to grant agreements with the federal government, they too are, those commitments that they make to us are contingent upon the federal appropriations. They have their own process too, and likewise the state as well. So I will try to get the commitment that you're asking for, but I just want to underscore you cannot ask any legislature or any sovereign state or federal government to make a commitment which is outside the scope of its power to do so and necessarily depends on appropriations.
Mr. Merdler, I think before
apologies.
Ms. Vanterpool, he had his hand up before.
Mr. Chairman, you reminded me earlier today of the answer to Mr. Zuckerman's question was where are we going to get the money from? And you reminded me that the function of this committee is to serve as the task force on looking for money. So let me try and help that process. If we close 347 Madison Avenue after 4 years of an authorization that it should have been closed 4 years ago, we would have $340 million. And if we had closed it 4 years ago, we would have had the interest on it. So it's time. 4 years of delay. Now we're the task force. I would not have raised it otherwise, Mr. Chairman.
Be my guest. Is there anybody else? Ms. Vanterpool.
I'd just like to reiterate the question that has been asked to my right, which is why does this have to be approved now?
Because first of all, one of the two actions that you're being requested to approve is to use some of R170, which is already in our budget, for advancing the design. So that's number one, and I do need that approval, or we're stopping the project. And it's $4.5 million of additional design funds to complete the design of the entrance, that vertical circulation package that enters from 33rd and 7th into the corridor, and that's our own money, and it's not dependent on the state. But the second is we're trying to advance the whole project kind of in tandem, and wanted to give the board an appropriately briefing on the direction of the business deal, and I think that I'm intending to respond to Mr. Weisbrod's question and to advance the project. But in order for us to really advance the project, we need to know that the institution is on board.
At least to the extent of $170 million already in the previously approved capital plan. Is that
correct?
Right?
But more broadly, I mean, this is one project, and I've got to keep advancing it down the pike, and so I am going to.
At least to the extent of starting to draw down on the $170 million.
Yeah, that's the.
So
I mean, I don't think there's an objection to drawing down the $170 million. I think the objection is to entering into an MOU which says that the MTA is responsible for the entire funding without the additional funding being in place.
So,
May I
what do we
move
got?
the question, please?
That would be a nice idea. The question has been called. Since we keep on sort of meeting ourselves around the block, the question has been called. He said, let's have a vote, up or down on it.
Well, can I make a suggestion? Because this is a suggestion that was made, as you will recall, a few months ago on a different item, that if the question is moved now, I would feel constrained to vote no, whereas if the question is not moved now, and if Mr. Lieber can get the commitment that he's seeking by Wednesday, we could have a vote at that time. We have done that before here with Mr. Schwartz, I will recall.
Right. We have in the past moved measures to the full board without making a recommendation one way or the other, and that might be
That's
an
a
appropriate-
one-off, frankly. That's a one-off. But let's try to do this. Mr. Lieber, again, to summarize, the question's been called. So, is there anything that you can add to this that would make the committee feel more comfortable that we are protecting our rights such as they may be?
I don't know about the word add. I think I've said what I said about the nature of the non-binding action, the timeliness of when the demand for certainty about the money is appropriately applied, and my willingness or our willingness to try to get the writing that Mr. Weisbott has requested this week. Those are the three responses I have.
Let me ask the question in a different way, perhaps to Mr. Quigley, who may still be around. It seems to be the desire of members of this committee. I'm not doing a straw poll. I'm not asking for a show of hands. To try to advance this project, but not to commit the institution to anything over and above the $170 million, which is not reimbursed for. Does that statement of intent have any meaning in this transaction?
Yeah, I mean, the MOU that I read this morning, as Mr. Lieber said, is non-binding. That means that if we do not get the commitment from the state for funding, we do not have to go forward with any contracts or enter into any deals with the developer for the property. If for whatever reason, whether it's failure to get money from the state or some other reason, we can simply be done with the whole thing and walk away from it. So I don't know if that clarifies anything, but I think Mr. Lieber said it multiple times. It's non-binding. All you're doing is committing to go forward to the next step of negotiating deals, contracts, whatever, which Mr. Lieber said will not be signed.
This
will not
wasn't
be entered
reopening the debate. This was asking me, the chair, asking our general counsel a question. Let me
I'm
be
sorry if
very
I
clear
didn't mean
about
to.
my intent.
I'm just trying to help. I'm sorry, but if I'm.
No, thank you. That sheds a lot of light on this. Okay. Is there a motion to approve? I'll second. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. Abstaining?
Sir, I don't have a vote at this committee.
Okay,
I just like to
I like
watch people spend money.
I like looking at you anyway. I like looking at you anyway. Well, there seems to be a tie. Huh? I'm sorry, what?
No, you're right, you're correct.
There seems to be a tie. What does that mean, Mr. Quigley? Is the motion lost?
If there is a tie, the acting chair gets two votes.
I believe it only applies to the full board, Mr. Quigley.
Well, I will need to check that. I believe so. All right, I will check that.
No, I get a vote. I'm a committee member. Okay.
What I would instead suggest is you can advance this, as I think Commissioner Merkel said, to the full board without recommendation.
That was,
Let's do that. Let's do that.
yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Florio, did you have anything to add to the real estate items?
No, sir, that's the sum total of our agenda.
Well then, on that note, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
May I
Second.
ask for a clarification? Is there any way I could seek positive action on the $4.5 million design there were two actions in the staff summary, and one was to approve expenditure of additional $4.5 million.
I could not imagine anybody opposed to that. Move. Second. All in favor? It's unanimous. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Second. All in favor? Thank you.